it's like, what are those three, to any leader across an organization that now says, hey, I got to go figure out what to do about AI. It's how do I get started, and where do I kind of, you know, how do I even think about maybe my first 90 days, right? And maybe it's even a first 90 days to 180 days, because this educate and brainstorm, it's going to take time, right? I mean, at the time you go through this cross-functional view across the organization, across the major capabilities, and you got to kind of prioritize those. But then getting people educated just to get them to the point of then being able to kind of go through ideation, it's going to take you a time to get there.
Well, I think as we back up with the enhanced daily work as the first item, right? So if I think about enhanced daily work and I'm trying to embed the processes of my current software, whether it's Microsoft and Copilot, the Google suite and Gemini, etc. When I'm enhancing that daily work, one of the things I also need to be doing at that point is actually talking to all of my business, and in particular the people that I know are early adopters for technology, because you may as a business already find that people have embedded other AI tools into their daily work in more of a shadow AI world, and you need to bring that into a managed AI world. So you may have some components where you already have some successes and some collaboration that you can leverage, but you need to know that going into both kind of assigning more of that management oversight and structure, and then into your education and brainstorming.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree, Kelly. I mean, I think the thing is if organizations don't get out in front of this quickly, you're already a little bit behind, right? Because it's so much out in the media, and it's so much out in people's personal lives, and it's now, as it gets embedded into business, there are organizations in almost every organization that are doing something. Some individuals are starting to use ChatGPT, whether they're starting to use Copilot out as a part of Bing, but they're starting to use it. And the issue ends up becoming some of that internal IP starts going into those capabilities and out into the wild. And so you need to make sure that you get in front of it, and like you said, managing it in a very managed way versus, say, a shadow way is going to be important for every enterprise.
I also think getting people trained on just how to use things like Copilot or like Gemini, or what tools might be available in an Oracle suite or a NetSuite suite or a SAP or a Microsoft Dynamics. What tools are available inside of the Salesforce, inside of those delivered applications that are already managed. You need to start training people on how to use them effectively and efficiently. And you need to expect that your people will be less efficient during the time that they're learning how to use these tools. That the learning curve to use Copilot doesn't mean that you're automatically going to gain the efficiencies. First, you have to learn how to use it, and you're going to be conscious that you don't know how to use it until it becomes part of your conscious competency when you're actually um, using it just unconsciously. It's part of your now daily habit, daily routine, that your meeting summarization or your meeting minutes are done via transcribe and summarized from Teams and Copilot.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I just last week I had conversations with organizations that have been early adopters of Copilot, and to be honest, they're left scratching their head a little bit, trying to really understand where the returns are going to come from in this. Because in some cases, they're trying to use it for effective meeting transcription and documenting those meeting minutes, and that's great. But at the end of the day, it's just summarizing what's been spoken, and there's the feedback or the anecdotal story from it was we were getting some kind of off-topic sort of comments and stuff in there, kind of baked into the meeting minutes, and this stuff would all get done and sent out, and then it would have to get reworked because it wasn't actually giving us the outputs that we wanted, the quality that we wanted. And at the end of the day, it's not really the LLM's fault or Copilot's fault. It's just about the organization, the people that are using these tools, learning how to use them effectively to get the outputs that they want. So I agree 100% with what both of you are saying. This is a great starter initiative for an organization to get into AI, to turn the switch on, even within those suites that have this AI embedded in it, whether it's Salesforce or Oracle or Microsoft Productivity Copilot. Figure out the use cases and stuff there, ongoing training and education, and ongoing sort of feedback so we can incorporate those sort of lessons learned about not just using it, but how to use it effectively to actually get the outcomes that we're looking to get.
Well, and I also think there's a part of it that talks about how you use it effectively and what you expect it to accomplish. Like, I would not expect Copilot to effectively do 100% of my meeting minutes. I need Copilot to do 80% of my meeting minutes correctly. So now I'm only having to do 20% of the editing. Right. So I think there's a little bit of expectation setting in that process. And I'd also say, I tried to use Copilot to schedule the follow-up meeting in Teams, have it send a new meeting invite for a specific date and time to everybody else that was on the call. And Copilot couldn't do that yet. That doesn't mean in 6 months, Microsoft's not going to have deployed that functionality, right? So the things that are maybe use cases that it can't accomplish today from a productivity standpoint, it will be able to, I would fully expect, in the future.
I mean, there's a couple examples that I had in the last 2 days is if you think about where Copilot is today, it's embedded in about 5 of the core Office applications, but it's also, then you get the Bing capability, right? And I happened to be in Power BI, and I was helping my son with a Power BI dashboard, and he couldn't get a formula right. I mean, it was one of those formulas that's if then embedded. It's got it was, I don't know, it was 3 lines deep, right? I mean, so it was a complex formula, and we just couldn't get it right. And he was struggling with it for a day, and then finally he left, and I was like, all right, let me just go see what Copilot would do. I basically said, fix this formula, copied and pasted the formula into Copilot, into the secured Bing environment. And it said, there's an error in this formula. Here's your error. Here's the formula you need, with all the right context of field names and everything. And I could actually then just cut and paste that back into Power BI, and boom, the whole thing worked. So, I mean, it was like he fought it for a day. I fought it for several hours. Copilot fixed it in 5 minutes, right? I mean, 5 seconds, right? So it's, even though Copilot wasn't built into Power BI, it solved the problem for me that we fought for, 2 days worth of effort. It saved it almost instantaneously. So you have those types of things that you got to share, those types of things across the community of how to then use it effectively, right? To be able to get those type of results. So it's going to have some things that it's going to be like night and day efficiency versus what you had, especially on some of those intellectual type problems or analytical problems. Other things might be a little bit more fuzzy. Like, I mean, one is how many people actually take meeting minutes. The fallacy that we've had for these online meetings, these virtual meetings for years now, nobody's taking minutes, right? I mean, how many organizations are really disciplined about taking minutes? I mean, the fact that you can at least have minutes now, and then you can say, hey, summarize my minutes into 100 words or less, and that you can plop into your email as you send back out to participants. It's a huge win. But I have had the cases, Kelly, that you said, where I was in Excel also doing something around trying to do text to columns or doing rows to columns, and I forgot how to do that. And so I said, well, let me ask Copilot. And Copilot said, well, I can't do that for you, but here's the link that explains how to do it. Do these 5 steps and it'll do it for you. And it was the right, it basically interrogated all the help documents and gave me 5 steps to be able to do it, right? So I think there's just the how do you interact and use it, and then how do you share with others the true successes that are out there, because it is a very, productivity is going to happen, right?
I was just going to say, I think that illustrates the point really well, that this is a good place to start, at least in my mind. So there's 2 examples that you just gave, David, around productivity increases for coding and getting technical things solved like that just huge productivity gain. Instead of 2 days, it's 5 minutes, right? Or in the case where there is no meeting minutes, and instead, at least there are some with summarized actions that are supposed to come out of the meeting and so on. So 2 very discrete things. And I think as an organization turns these switches and starts to enable this capability in their tool sets, these things will start to become apparent around where these kind of pockets of real return for that organization come into play, like really readily. But these are just 2 examples that might end up manifesting into 50 or 100 examples for any given organization of huge productivity wins that you may not even expect going in. But having that sort of center of excellence sort of viewpoint and ongoing sort of education and support to be able to translate those, to gather those wins, to identify them and kind of share those learnings and all that kind of stuff is super important if you want to try to leverage it at scale across a large organization. So definitely good like tips and tricks for organizations that are starting on this path.
Well, like you said, I mean, that really translates then into the accountability discussion, right? It's who's accountable for capturing those tips and tricks, and having the lunch and learns, and having the collaboration and sharing across the organization. Because, I mean, this is unlike any productivity things that I've seen in the past. If you look over the last 20, 30 years, the impact that this can have so quickly based on just these small little things that add up is pretty immense, right? And it's like, how do you leverage and share that across your organization in an effective way, right? And the only way you're going to do it is somebody's got to be responsible for it. Somebody's got to be accountable. And that's where I think you get into this dyad accountability, that you got to really combine kind of this organizational leaders, that one may have more of a technology perspective, one has more of a business perspective, for driving and creating the capability, this center of excellence capability across the organization.
I agree with that. I know that I've worked in a couple of medical companies where that whole dyad concept of I've got a business person and I've got a medical person, and they partner together to make sure that everything is working correctly in their respective domains. But they're responsible for the same sets of clients. In this case, I think it really needs to be an IT person that can be thinking about the security and the RAGs and the large language models and do I need it on my own server? Can I go out to the cloud and use a cloud? And if I'm going to use the cloud, is it open source? Is it maybe something that's more of a point solution on the cloud, right? But I then need the business person to be talking about, here's how I use it in my day-to-day world. Too often now, you start talking to IT guys about AI and AI automation, and they're talking about RAGs and LLMs. And as a business person, my eyes are just going to glaze over. That's not solving my problem.
And that's it. I was talking to an organization this morning, and it's kind of exactly what happened to them too, is the business leader kind of had the need. The technology person was leading kind of the AI strategy and really attacking it from kind of the technology components. And finally, that they basically just said, the business person gave up because their eyes basically glazed over. Because, I mean, you're talking, they're so dynamic around the speed of change that things are happening right now. And as these companies are putting the computing power in place and kind of competing on the LLM capabilities, there's a lot of change that's happening. And the business person doesn't want to have to deal with any of that, right? The business person is like, how do I actually become more productive using these capabilities? And if you're telling me it's changing so quickly, then I'm just going to give up for now and tell me when you're ready. Versus there's some really potent, prominent use cases that they could implement and get started with to drive value today and not wait, right?
I also think that's where this concept of a dyad comes into play, not just at an executive level where you've got a CIO or a VP of IT and a chief commercial officer or chief operating officer or chief financial officer that are the CEO designates as his dyad, but that concept flows all the way down through. So it may be that there's a sales guy or somebody in FP&A that's a really early adopter of technology and is already out there trying to figure out those business use cases and can work with the technology counterpart at a worker bee level to go get some of these quick wins and get them in as the strategy is getting developed, maybe at a higher level.
At least then it starts to become more of a managed effort versus kind of a rogue effort, right? It's not, you don't want the rogue effort happening. You want to be able to know it's there and that it's happening and that it's following. There's some way that you're going to assess the success or failures or lessons learned and make sure it kind of feeds back into the overall capabilities. Because each time you build a capability, it's going to build on top of each other in this kind of dynamic world right now.
I also think as part of that measurement process at the back end, you have to account for the cost of whatever that AI solution is that's getting built out and embedded, right? Because these solutions are going to start to get monetized. And if you've got 15 rogue solutions out there that you're ultimately going to have to start paying for, as opposed to maybe 5 managed solutions, you know, your cost structure at the end in aggregate is going to be vastly different.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like this model of having this two-person approach for a couple of reasons. One is, like, every organization is approaching this AI thing with a little bit of dose of caution. Like there's this excitement and sort of anticipation about the promises of AI, especially Gen AI organizationally, I think. But caution because they're not entirely sure about where they're going to get those real returns on the business. Like, what are the actual use cases that are going to drive either cost reduction or revenue improvement to the bottom line? And by having that business domain expert paired up with a center of excellence type person, whether they're in IT or some other facet of the organization, you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to start to eliminate some of that shadow AI type things, hit on some of the synergies that you were talking about, Kelly, right? Where you can have a single solution that you're kind of building on as opposed to 10 or 15 different point solutions. But you're going to have that real focus on the specifics of the business problem in a given domain by having that other person that sits in marketing or sales or finance or whatever it happens to be together with them. So that's the real way you're going to get those synergies long term, by having an AI strategy that's holistic and forward looking, by having that center of excellence type of person there. But you're going to make sure that you're going to get real value for the money on the return side by having that business domain expert there too. And you might end up finding where there's pockets of data and real proprietary stuff that we have organizationally that we maybe can consider putting on the roadmap in terms of our strategy development that is maybe a little bit longer term, broader vision, mid to long term sort of thinking, where these things can start to have like a data governance structure around this data, so that we can start to really do some proprietary things that will set us apart from the competition.
I think all of that's the case. I also think that, Jody, to the point you were making earlier in this conversation, it's about how to celebrate successes. And if you have dyads of people celebrating the successes, you've got those successes running up, say, the IT channel, and you've got them running up various business channels, so that you have a little bit of a force multiplier in terms of what was that business success.
I mean, within kind of this the dyad from an accountability standpoint, I mean, I think you also got to, it's then figuring out where are your champions or your cross-functional teams across the enterprise, right? So it's like, now how do I kind of assemble these topical type driven working teams across the enterprise and get them assigned to kind of, let's call it working teams or cross-functional teams, right? To be able to help kind of moving into that next step of true, say, education and brainstorming, and it's getting those right people in the organization assembled, what I think is going to be critical, right? And it might be pulling, like on Gen AI, it might be pulling somebody absolutely from marketing. You're absolutely going to have somebody from a marketing and marketing communication standpoint. You might have somebody on the, it could be more on the back end contracts. And if you're looking at contract generation or contract intelligence, you're bringing those people together, right? If it's robotic process automation, it's like, where is that repetitive work that we need to try to automate? And it's more of an automation play versus, say, a Gen AI content creation play, right? Very distinctly different solutions, but all underneath this kind of AI umbrella, right? I think right now, a lot of people are getting confused of AI being Gen AI, which is really more of only a discipline or a capability inside of kind of this AI umbrella. But defining those cross-functional teams is going to be a critical component in getting the right people, right? The people that are early adopters of technology, the people that do have a perspective. And I think, Kelly, I can see from one of the other things is maybe get some of the people that are less adopters of technology. Maybe it's because it's also a change management exercise to educate people, and your change management begins here at the education step, right?
Correct. I think there is a component of this in that educate and brainstorm, that as you're running any of the multiple workshops, you have to have both people that are the early adopters, excited about technology, understand process, etc., but maybe some of those people that maybe are not as excited about this process, and see if you can help them understand what's in it for them, right? Or where might it help them? The change management effort needs to include the influencers of the organization as well as the leadership of the organization. I'm in an interesting place with one of my clients right now where almost universally every one of the AP clerks that I've talked to are talking about we need more automation. I think all of them recognize that that means headcount will come out of the organization eventually, but they're all, any of them with enough experience in the workforce are going, oh my God, at my old client, we used to be able to automate these invoices. We didn't have to touch them. And here it's a manual process, right? So as much as we sometimes think about people being afraid or people not wanting to give up, I also think we have to recognize that there are plenty of people that want to adopt and want to brainstorm about what ideas would work best for them.
Well, I was just going to say this whole conversation makes me think about the approach that you take to how you ferret out these use cases that are most applicable to an organization. So we're talking about education and brainstorming. There's definitely a methodical approach to how you do these kinds of things in order to get what you want out. We talked a little bit about stakeholder management and who's involved. We talked about how you structure your team and having sort of a dyad sort of business focus and an AI sort of discipline focus together, organizing this stuff. We talked about different people that you might invite to things like this, whether it's people that have promise as sort of a change champion or an AI adoption champion, but also maybe the perspective of others that may be a little bit more resistant. And this is part of the change management exercise or thought process that needs to go in. And then we also talked about what do you talk about, where it's not just ChatGPT. So we have 100 million people that have now logged in and signed in and are having interactions and so on, and they think that's the whole world of AI. But to your point, David, we have you know, analytics, and we have decision support, we have computer vision, we have machine learning techniques. There's so many other facets to AI than just having an interactive chat conversation type capability. So bringing those types of people and conversations to these brainstorming exercises is going to help you build a much more holistic and fulsome roadmap that'll help you set up maybe the best path forward for a company.
Yeah, and what was interesting, there was an article I was looking at. It was actually Harvard Business Review that talked about, they were interviewing thousands of people, and they were getting their insight around true use cases. And then they cataloged the use cases into like the top 100, but then they broke it out of where people are using Gen AI. And I think what's interesting is it's a pretty equal split around some of these categories, whether it's, technical assistance and troubleshooting, content creation and editing, which you now hear a lot about because of images and video and that type of thing, whether it's professional support, learning and education, creativity and recreation, right? So you got a lot of people now even using it more in their personal lives, right? So it's like, there's so many different usages, right? And it goes against so many different categories, and it's personal and professional. The opportunities are very broad, right? And this is just the one pillar, like we're talking about, of kind of an overall AI type capability, right? But this is the one that's kind of, most prominent in the news right now, but it definitely has a lot of widespread type usage and opportunity.
Not to date ourselves, but as I look at this and I look at how many people are now using it inside of personal world, I wonder how many queries or questions into ChatGPT within the last week talked about eclipses and the totality of eclipses and when are the next eclipses and where are they and what do I look for in an eclipse?
I'll tell you, I know more about an eclipse today than I ever have in my lifetime. Right? I mean, I know that the sun's 400 times bigger than the moon, but the moon is 400 times closer, so that's why they look like they're equal. So it's like, it's immense of what how quickly at your fingertips. And before it was, you could search, but you still had to kind of then interpret all of the results and prioritize all of the results. Now it's kind of like, now I can ask a question and now the results are more curated for me in a logical way, right? So it's like now your results, I mean, it's really a next evolution of search, but it's the capability it's so much easier to be able to digest, right?
Yeah, I'm going to play the use case out. I mean, my brother-in-law and I spent a good chunk of Monday night trying to figure out where we're going to go eclipse chasing. And whilst we think we have an answer, I'm not going to say it on a recorded webcast just because I don't want the rest of the world, appearing in case this goes viral. But we were both out there using regular search. As I look at this, I want to experiment tonight and go to ChatGPT and see if I give it the parameters he and I were looking for, where is it going to tell me to go?
Yeah, it's kind of more of a true guidance versus just a dump of information, right? And so it's definitely a game changer. And the other thing is, I remember Kelly and I, we worked in a client together, and one of our clients, which we thought very highly of, very talented, younger, aggressive, and we were talking about her attributes. We were trying to help her with career planning, and she goes, "Well, one of the things I do well is Google search." So she listed it as a capability, and I've never seen somebody list Google search as a capability before. But as I started thinking about it, I was like, to be able to get good results and insights from just search, there is a talent on how you phrase and how you integrate with search. But now that's even so much more important with generative AI because it's all about the prompt. It's all about what you put in is going to determine the value of what you get out. So if you're not good at putting things in and phrasing and asking exactly what you want in a very detailed way, you're not going to get near what the value of somebody else is going to get. So prompt engineering. I mean, it is a field now that's absolutely front and center, right?
And I think that just to go a little further with that, if you have, 10 people in a given department doing a certain function, and they're all trying to use Copilot or some equivalent of sort of GPT, Gen AI, and they're all trying to figure out on their own how to build out this, how do I ask the right question? Just like Google, you put something in double quotes to try to get a good quality response and so on. You have 10 different people trying to figure it all out on their own, and they're not really well trained on prompt engineering or how this whole thing works. They're all going to be doing their own thing, coming out with completely variable results, and you're probably going to be a little dissatisfied with the productivity gains. You're going to be probably a little bit frustrated as the person that might be responsible for that department. So this is where that sort of mindful approach to rolling these things out in a kind of controlled, methodical way with that training and awareness and education around how to do things properly, or potentially even automate some of these processes. If you have a repeatable thing that you're trying to prepare RFPs or summarize this or do different things, build some platform tools. There's AI development platforms out there where you can predefine the prompts that you want to use and pre-decide on the appropriate LLM model that you're going to use so you can contain cost. But your output is always going to be very, very consistent, because that prompt that you've already structured and tested and validated can now be deployed and made available to all your departmental users. They're all going to be pre-trained with the same corporate documents, all pre-trained with the same prompt engineering. The output, they're all going to be using the same model. You're going to get similar in the same output and results. So these are just sort of things that are going to become more and more readily apparent, I think, to organizations as they roll out this capability, is how much time and energy is probably going to shift to equipping your teams on how to use these tools properly to get those quality, repeatable results.
With on the as we talk about kind of the education and brainstorming of the team, it's I know we've spent a lot of time as an organization looking at that education process. What's the right kind of, how do you build, what are the building blocks of an education program to be effective, right? And as we put those building blocks together, I mean, just the education process alone, I mean, the way we laid it out is pretty much a dedicated kind of 3-day type workshop environment or education process just to go through a logical building of the capabilities to get everybody to at least a good common starting point, right? So it's not, I'm going to go train you in an hour and we're done, right? I mean, there's a lot here. It needs to kind of be broken down to the very starting point of kind of the AI for beginners, and then build on top of each other. And so the way we look at it is, I see it as a series of workshops and working sessions over a multiple day approach. In our definition, kind of a 3-day approach to get to that at least starting point, common starting point, to then be able to move from, right? And I think it's very important, is this education step before you just try to go in and brainstorm on ideas or ideation.
I also think that as we think about education, to be able to participate in a workshop, we can never assume that all 3 days is going to be remembered by the time you get in the next workshop, right? It is a repeatable, ongoing education process as well. It's just like anything else when we deploy or recommend to clients on how they deploy their ERP software packages to a new group of users, right? You have to plan for training before go live, and you have to plan for training after go live. Because guess what? 90% of what you teach them 2 weeks before go live is out of their head. You're going to be lucky if they remember how to log on to the system or how to click the Copilot button, right? It's repeated.
But then you need the onboarding training in addition, right? So it's like people before you go turn something on, after, but then you got new people coming into the enterprise all the time. And now this kind of how we become, I know it's kind of a little people in the marketplace saying an AI powered workplace, but it absolutely is. You got to educate people on how you as an organization have deployed those capabilities, how you use those capabilities, how do you make and especially your knowledge workers more effective and more efficient in their daily process. It's a thing that it's definitely a differentiation across organizations. So you're going to see it's critical that you get, you get an education program that also brings new people up to that same common level of understanding for your organization.
I think that plays back to a little bit about what you were talking earlier, David, with as new people come in, particularly those new people that might be early adopters of education or early adopters of an AI tool, right? You have another possibility of someone going rogue. So how do you keep them from going rogue and give them the education on how your team and your business is working with AI? Otherwise, you're gone rogue. You've got a shadow AI out there, not a managed AI solution that somebody may be bringing in because they've worked with it efficiently someplace else at one of your competitors, potentially.
And I think exactly right. And I think all of this is all about how do we get value from AI and what's the appropriate steps in education and awareness and stuff to make it useful and valuable. But of course, the other big thing that's at the top of every leader's mind right now in the AI space is responsible AI. How do I make sure that my data is protected, that the security and privacy of my employees and my customers and sensitive data is protected, make sure information is not going back in to be retraining the model, that we're monitoring for biases and things like that on the outputs, especially for customer or external facing type things, that we're not opening ourselves up to liability and stuff in those areas. So all this stuff is obviously extremely important in order to get the productive and ROI type returns out of an AI investment. But just as important is making sure that we start off on the right foot in terms of our journey towards responsible AI, so we're not going to get ourselves into trouble along the way.
I like that as almost as a conclusion. It's about not just the journey to AI, but the journey to responsible AI within your organizational context.
I think that's the other element of the dyad approach, is that center of excellence can help you in the tool selection and the technology and the data pipeline and the tools and all the processes around the back office stuff, but also making sure that they're taking the organization as a whole in all of the solutions, regardless of whether it's for marketing or finance or HR or what have you, are doing it in a responsible way that's kind of coordinated. So there should be sort of like some policy implications, procedures and usage, maybe some tools and technology for monitoring and compliance, ongoing monitoring of quality outputs for biases and things. So there's a whole tech stack and a whole process and a whole competency that an organization will have to mature along in order to make sure not just that our first kick at the can for AI solutions are responsible, but on an ongoing basis, we're doing the right things where we need to.
Yeah. And I think it's critical that organizations, I mean, if you look at these 3 steps, right? These 3 steps, I mean, we're trying to really focus and simplify it. But these 3 steps for the beginning of this journey is a pretty intense process and focus to be able to be effective, right? You're not talking like, oh, in 3 weeks, we're going to kind of get through these steps, right? I mean, you're talking that based on the size of organization and number of people and stuff, obviously it varies, but you're really talking about, if I'm going to try to give like a 6-month target of where I need to be in a 6-month milestone, to get through these first 3 steps effectively with the foundation to be able to move forward is a pretty aggressive effort, right? Especially at the rate of change that things are happening, the amount of education that needs to happen, the number of people involved. It's not a small effort, but you got to start. You got to start as an organization and then start moving down that path.
And ultimately, I think organizations are going to need to staff up in these areas in order to develop this in-house kind of competency and so on. Eventually, all organizations will get there. In the meantime, they'll need to start, even if that means tapping somebody internally to assume those sort of roles and responsibilities, and if necessary, bring in some help in order to help them along the way. But I think this is kind of maybe the path where it's headed.
I guess a question on that, Jody, because this is something I've thought about, but I don't know if I have a good, clear answer. So, obviously right now to hire AI resources is almost cost prohibitive. People that really know this, right? Because they're getting hired by NVIDIA and Facebook and Microsoft and Google and IBM, and all of these companies are going out there trying to win this war, right? Of kind of whose platform is going to be best. And then there's new entries into that every day. So to try to get those individuals, it's like cost prohibitive. So from a resourcing standpoint, is it first getting, you got to identify those people inside your organization, or do you got to supplement them, or how do you recommend you get started from a people standpoint? Say a resource standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need somebody internally to be tapped as the person that's going to be responsible for this program launch, whatever facet and whatever shape and form it ends up taking, because it does require some attention and focus. Maybe you're not in a position to do that right away, but you're gonna have to have someone that's the program manager, if you will, for this initiative, ultimately probably leading into a full-time thing. Most organizations, I think by far, are not prepared to make an investment in hiring a full-time chief data science officer or chief head of AI type of a resource, because they don't really know what the path is yet. They don't know what they don't know. They're not immersed in this stuff day to day. They spend 10 hours a day in meetings and making decisions, and they have a life outside of AI and in a space that's changing literally on a daily and weekly basis, and it's awfully hard to keep up. So most organizations, I think, are going to have to tap somebody to kind of lead the charge, somebody that already exists, and then I think they're going to have to leverage people from outside the organization to augment and give them that additional horsepower and that level of expertise that they're looking for. And maybe you don't need someone that has 15 years of machine learning doing regression analysis and hardcore machine learning data science. You don't need a data scientist expert. Maybe you need somebody that's a little bit of a generalist that can look holistically at the whole gamut, whether it's generative AI for summary and creation and content and video and text to speech and translation, but also computer vision and also the gambit of machine learning sort of techniques. So you're not going in there with kind of siloed sort of viewpoints on what the art of the possible is.
I think to a certain extent, some of this resource constraint is potentially why that dyad model might work well. Because you're taking not full-time resources internally and making them accountable, but you're making a partnership of people accountable for achieving this objective. So it's not a program manager, it's these dyads of people that you're putting together in small teams, with the dyad itself having the accountability. So I think that may get you some of the component as well, David. And then I think it's back to some, as I think about small organizations, not even mid-sized organizations, but I think about the $250 million to $1 billion type organizations, right? You're really probably not going to be able to hire that much externally. You're probably not going to be able to, certainly not hire somebody to be full-time lead. It's going to be that dyad component, but I think that's also where you're looking at who are your early adopters and how do you go do the lunches and learns and the, maybe it's 2 hours a week of workshops or something along those lines. Right. But I think you've got to make sure you scale in size to your organizational size.
Yeah, and it's a tremendous opportunity to tap future leaders, right? So it's an opportunity for somebody to really go embrace and prove themselves in this ever changing type environment. So I'd also probably agree with what both of you said, and I think it's an opportunity to tap somebody that you know is going to step up and be with the organization, and you also expect that person to be there for a long-term role, not necessarily somebody that's 1 foot out the door.
I think it is a growth assignment for whomever takes it. So you want to make sure that you're kind of looking around your organization and saying, who is it that we're trying to grow?